Rockets fans, welcome to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video where we're going to continue our mini mock series after starting yesterday's video with a Detroit Pistons mini mock. We're going to continue in this process with the Houston Rockets. Really excited for this video. If you are as well, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content, then also hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. And without further ado, let's jump into this video preview here. What is a mini mock? In case you didn't catch that video yesterday on the Detroit Pistons, a Utility Sports mini mock draft looks at one specific team. This video is centered on the Houston Rockets in the NBA draft and what they would take at each draft spot that team could be potentially picking. Here for the Houston Rockets, we are going to be looking at not one, but two different selections, which I'm really excited for. So let's go ahead, jump forward now and look at their NBA draft lottery odds, which is the first point of emphasis for us here. They have the second best odds technically, but really it's a tie for first on this team on who they could potentially be drafting based on where they are in the draft. 14% chance at number 1, 13.4% chance to number 2, 12.7% chance to number 3, 12% chance to pick 4th, and then they actually have a 47.8% chance between picks 5 and 6 after winning their tiebreaker with the San Antonio Spurs to move up to number 2, which means that their new draft floor is 6th overall with their own first round pick, which I do think is an important note because the difference between pick 6 and pick 7 might be a substantive gap in a draft class. I think a great example of that is Josh Giddey and Jonathan Kuminga a few years ago. Giddey's really proving to be a consistent starting level player, whereas Kuminga lands in Golden State and has given less of an opportunity, but also just has showcased less in his minutes as well. So I think there is sometimes a big drop off between certain numbers in a draft. Not that this draft has a huge drop off, but you'd rather pick 6 than 7. Obviously now Houston, at very worst case scenario, pick 6th overall in case there's no lottery luck. But remember, there's about a 52.2% chance that this team picks in the top 4. So it is pretty favorable for them with the likelihood of grabbing one of the top 4 guys in this year's draft. And I think there's a good argument for any of them. But I think the clear number 1 guy here, if you're considering pick number 1, first overall, who would they take? I think everybody and their mother knows it at this point. Victor Wembanyama would be the Houston Rockets selection. And this would be a dream scenario, not only for Houston, but for head coach Ime Udoka, who is the brand new fresh hire right off the block, coming over from the Boston Celtics after having a year of not being a head coach, following a fantastic rookie coaching season where he went to the NBA Finals and had a really nice stretch, not only as the Celtics head coach, but also in the playoffs. I just think made a lot of really good decisions, and the Rockets now, after some personal stuff, have a really good coach on their hands that I think can lead this franchise in a way that other coaches just in the past have not. You think back to Adelman, D'Antoni, Silas. To be honest, I'm not really a big fan of any of those coaches, whereas Ime Udoka I actually trust for his defensive strategies, the way that he employs kind of triple coverage when it comes to guarding the pick and roll. He likes to use a third guy to really tag in and defend the pick and roll, and he does that more so than pretty much any other team in the league does. And I think if they were to land Victor Wembanyama, that would be the instant role Victor would play on this team. They would likely put him on the other team's worst shooter most games that isn't the center. Sometimes they would use him against the center. It's not like every single second on the floor he's going to be guarding a wing player, but a lot of the time they would. They'd put him on a poor shooting wing. So think about if they're playing the Cavaliers, Isaac Okoro is Victor Wembanyama's matchup, and his entire job is rotate to the paint, block a ton of shots, protect the rim. And I think Victor Wembanyama would be such a special prospect in doing that for Houston, and it would give them a very different style big behind Alperen Şengün, around Alperen Şengün. And I think it causes kind of a fun lineup issue for Houston, because do you just play your best skilled players, and is Alperen Şengün still a starter then? Because he's a starting level player for sure. Do you continue to start him? Do you bring him off the bench as kind of this bench spark plug 6th man scoring type that we don't see very often as a big man in the NBA? I think that could be an intriguing pathway as well. Nonetheless, though, Houston would have a lot of lineup flexibility, a lot of different options. Plus, they have a massive amount of cap space. And if you draft Victor Wembanyama, there's going to be a lot of good veterans interested in playing alongside Victor Wembanyama. I think this guy's going to make a lot of people a lot of money in his time in the league, both teammates and prospective players that would want to play with him. I think there's going to be a lot of teams interested in obviously acquiring Victor Wembanyama's services, not only for Victor, but also just the overall franchise value increasing, the attractivity in free agency, how attractive the destination is, the attractiveness of the Houston Rockets would increase significantly with Victor Wembanyama on the roster. And because of that, free agency, I mean, the Rockets would become a center point this year. And that's where we really see a potential James Harden reunion making a lot of sense. I know Rockets fans are big time James Harden fans, of course, for his time there in H-Town and how he represented that city. So if you guys want to see Wembanyama and Harden together in Houston, comment down below Harden to H-Town, and we'll make it happen once again with a little bit of manifestation. As we slide over to second overall, what would the Rockets look to do with this pick? And I think there is some questions here about how this could potentially look and everything kind of with the second overall. And there's some questions here about, okay, well, if they're interested in James Harden, what would they do here? I think the clear answer is they still select Scoot Henderson second overall. He would be the franchise's point guard for the future. Does that complicate a James Harden reunion? It 100% does. But remember, the Rockets have a ton of cap space. Could they still look to bring in Harden kind of as like a combo guard and maybe you play with a heavy guard lineup? I wouldn't necessarily completely rule that out, but I do think the more likely thing would maybe be interest in trading for Jaylen Brown, even if it costs Jalen Green and some draft picks to do so. You would pair Jaylen Brown with Scoot Henderson. Maybe James Harden still comes along with that grouping, and you have a really dynamic trio then of talented perimeter players who can do a lot of different stuff with the basketball in their hands. Of course, Jaylen Brown's relationship with Ime Udoka would be a main drawing factor, but let's focus here on Scoot Henderson himself in Houston. What does he bring to the Rockets? He's a fantastic floor general, and I think he's going to really organize this team, something that I just don't think that they had very much of in Steven Silas's era as the head coach of the Houston Rockets. It felt more like a YMCA or lifetime team than anything. It just, there wasn't a clear plan of attack. There wasn't a clear decision maker, creator consistently for others on this team. In fact, Alperen Sengun, I think, was the best at that on the roster. And I think this also gives a little bit more role definition to a guy like Kevin Porter Jr., who would transition to a bench role. He has a lot of backing within the organization, especially Tillman Fertitta, I know, is a big Kevin Porter Jr. fan, someone who would support him greatly in Houston. Actually, KPJ was the only one to attend Ime Udoka's press conference out of all current Rockets players, which maybe is a question on those other guys, why they weren't there to kind of impress their new head coach. But KPJ, I think, does have a long-term standing in this organization. They've really enjoyed him being there since trading for him. What was a very, very protected second-round pick. Definitely a good move for the Rockets. And now I think just moving him back into a more natural role of like a bench scorer, bench spark plug, would really kind of clarify some things for KPJ in a role that makes a lot more sense for him skill set wise, whereas Scoot Henderson becomes the lead point guard, organizes the show, runs a ton of pick and rolls, gets Jalen Green the rock in advantageous situations. And I think everyone on the Rockets would play better. I think their percentages from the field would increase significantly. And having that one downhill drive and kick threat in Scoot Henderson, who's shown the ability to make really crazy passes both off of his feet in the air, which I would advise for him to lessen doing just so that he turns the ball over a little bit less. But just the ability, the athleticism is on pure display. And I think the Rockets here would get a really great player second overall. And if you're interested in seeing a Rockets mock draft in totality across all the other teams in the league, I do have one of those out on the channel from this week earlier as well. And the Rockets actually find themselves in a pretty similar situation in that one, so I'd recommend going to check that one out for more insight on the Scoot Henderson to Houston dynamic. Then third overall, we get into a spot here where the Rockets would have a little bit of a question for themselves. I know that most people would just think case closed, pick Brandon Miller. I think there's a little bit of discussion to be had here for the Rockets on, do they consider Amen Thompson just because of their point guard need, or is Brandon Miller really the option? For me, I did land on Brandon Miller ultimately, not because I just think that it's a no-brainer that case closed, the Rockets should do it. I think it's easier for the Rockets, though, to find a point guard through free agency. And if it's not James Harden, it could potentially be Fred VanVleet, who is also an unrestricted free agent this offseason, that I think the Rockets would have interest in bringing him in as kind of a veteran organizer. Now, I think he's a significantly worse organizer, a significantly worse passer than James Harden, which is why I still prefer Harden to H-Town, even though his days of scoring 35 points a game are probably over. I think that, still having the guy who led the league in assists this year and knows how to play with solid pace and knows when to speed the game up, knows when to slow the game down, knows when to get the ball to certain players at certain times. Harden's very advanced in that regard, and I think Brandon Miller would find a lot of success that way. And I also think Jabari Smith Jr. would as well. And I think that's why Harden makes so much sense to Houston, especially if it's with Wembanyama or with Brandon Miller through the draft, because one way or another, you're adding a lot of length, size, shot making. And I think Brandon Miller is a very good fit still onto this team because it's a significant upgrade at the small forward spot. Probably means you don't have to go out and actually target Jaylen Brown through the trade market, which I'm interested to hear, Rockets fans, your thoughts on Jaylen Brown and his potential fit with the Houston Rockets and what you'd be willing to trade for him. But nonetheless, I think that Jabari Smith and Brandon Miller would be an intriguing wing duo because both of them are deep range shot makers, very, very similar prospects, honestly. Now, Jabari Smith did less with the ball in his hands than Brandon Miller did in their times at college. So I think that Miller's Alabama tape is a little bit more advanced than Smith's Auburn tape. But I think that Smith, a little bit more of a natural defender, a little bit better on the perimeter, moving his feet, did record over 50 blocks as a rookie as well. Had a very decent rookie season, honestly, despite, I think, kind of being a letdown in terms of where the expectations were. I think that we saw enough from Jabari Smith to believe that he's going to be a good long-term player and that if he was in the right team, right system with the right players around him, he would have been even more productive. And I think you add in Brandon Miller, you find some type of point guard out in free agency, and all of a sudden this team is really clicking moving forward in a way that they just have not been in years past. And I'm very excited to see this Rockets team take some of those steps forward. But fourth overall, let's say they fall to 4 in the draft, where would they go from there? And at this point, the point guard position through free agency becomes, again, even more cloudy. I think this is more of a long-term maneuver for the Houston Rockets, but it is Amen Thompson. Now, I don't think he's ready year one to kind of pivot this team towards the postseason, like I talked about with Wembanyama plus Harden or Harden plus Brandon Miller as potential options. I think Scoot Henderson gets you significantly closer to being a postseason team even than what Amen Thompson does in year one. But there's a pathway that 5, 6, 7 years from now, we could be talking about Amen Thompson as one of the surefire top 2 or top 3 players from this draft, because at 6'7" with a lightning quick handle, he gives the Rockets something that they just don't have right now, of like this extremely athletic downhill threat who is also going to make the right decisions as a playmaker. I know people thought I was going to be describing Jalen Green there for a second until I said good decisions as a playmaker, which I think Jalen Green still needs to grow in. Jalen Green's more of a scoring guard, whereas Amen Thompson is a guard who can score, but is a playmaker at heart. And that's really where I think the Rockets would find some success. We also know Ime Udoka is going to have interest in adding other kinds of bigs to this roster around Alperen Şengün. Specifically, I would assume rim protecting and roll and dive guy type big men, which is what they really need to add, especially if they had an Amen Thompson or even a James Harden or a Scoot Henderson. Those types of players work really well with ball handling guards. And I think that Amen Thompson with wing size is a really intriguing dynamic upside fit that the Rockets could still look to explore. It doesn't necessarily accelerate their rebuild, which does hinder them going into next year where they owe their 2024 first to the Oklahoma City Thunder. There is a top 4 protection on that pick, I believe. So maybe with some lottery luck next year, we see the Rockets actually hold that pick in somewhat of a weaker class. But nonetheless, the Rockets here find at least a point guard. In my Pistons mini mock, I talked about this being a trade down spot for the Pistons. I think the Rockets are a little bit more open to adding in a player like Amen Thompson, even though it doesn't necessarily accelerate that rebuild as much as they would like. I know that there's interest in management and ownership to get back to the playoffs quickly, but sometimes though you just have to take what's presented to you, and if they land 4th overall in the lottery, this is the right pick and the pick that they should actually make at this spot. Going into 5th overall now, we see the option here to look at a few different players. You could consider someone like a Jarace Walker out of Houston, a Cam Whitmore. There's a few options out here that do make some sense. Ultimately, I landed with staying in city with Houston Cougars forward Jarace Walker, who as of right now should be considered the odds-on favorite, in my opinion, to be selected 5th overall. Feels like a lot of teams could use his services. We've seen this in drafts in the past where forwards with similar size and shot-making skill sets, you think about DeAndre Hunter, Patrick Williams as 2 examples, typically stay around the top 4 or top 5 overall. And Jarace Walker, to me here, feels like a good fit for Houston because Jabari Smith, probably versatile enough to play as kind of a small forward Now, maybe Jarace Walker is what you would classify as a small forward. Nonetheless, though, they're completely different styled wings. Jabari Smith, more of that 3-and-D, kind of lengthy, not very strong frame to him, as Jarace Walker's built of muscle, like Ford tough muscle, right? And he's going to be able to play through contact, play around physicality. He's going to play with his back to the basket a little bit. Very quick feet defensively. I think he's going to be a really good young player and somebody who probably sticks in the league for 15, 16 years. It's just, he has an NBA body. He's got the NBA brain to do it. His shot making's on another level compared to some of the prospects here a little bit after him. And because of that, it just feels like 5th overall should be the selection for him, especially since when you consider the fit into Houston, they need more smart defenders, more perimeter defenders specifically, to kind of maybe mitigate some of the things that Alperen Şengün doesn't do very well defensively. And I think Jarace Walker does fit the bill there. This is, like, again, one of the worst case scenarios here for Houston, because 5th overall, you're just not really in a great spot, because you would hope that, oh, really, we had a bunch of teams jump us. That means 3 teams jumped them in the lottery. So this is not extremely likely, but it's not a complete impossibility either. And because of that, you have to have some type of plan. And Jarace Walker, to me, feels like the sure thing at that spot, or is about as sure as it can get at this selection. So then 6th overall, I mentioned some of those other guys. I ended up opting here for Taylor Hendricks, 6th overall for the Houston Rockets, because he feels like an Ime Udoka pick a little bit more than Cam Whitmore does. Now, I think Cam Whitmore would draw some consideration here for sure too, but I landed on Taylor Hendricks because of the rim protection element. I think that his 3-and-D nature, and a little bit of a different 3-and-D nature than Jabari Smith, again, like we talked about. Hendricks is going to play a little bit more to the corner. He's a little bit more of a closeout attacker. I think a little bit stronger as well, and I think he's going to be able to match up as a small ball center a little bit too. Not something we saw Ime Udoka explore too much in Boston. They played with a lot of bigger lineups across Al Horford and Robert Williams. But I do think that giving Ime Udoka some lineup flexibility and versatility would be a really good thing. The Rockets could definitely get away with Hendricks and Jabari Smith playing 5 and 4 respectively. And because of that, it gives you some real options to space out the court, open up things for Jalen Green as a slasher, open up some things for Kevin Porter Jr. as a shot creator. I still think free agency is going to be a big area for them. Maybe a Jaylen Brown trade still would go down in this regard if they fall all the way to 6. Now, again, this is not the most likely thing, but 6th overall does make quite a bit of sense for this Rockets team, because Hendricks fits what they're looking to do. Hendricks fits some of the things that I think Ime Udoka would want to have on his roster in terms of flexibility, versatility. He's kind of a perfect 4-man for today's NBA, with the ability to kind of rotate over, play the 5 like what we've seen Draymond do defensively. Now, I don't know if he has the IQ quite of what Draymond does. Draymond's defensive film is insane and off the charts. A little bit less so here for Taylor Hendricks, but I still think that there's some of the elements that you want, especially the verticality he's able to challenge with around the rim, and he's not afraid of getting postered, which is step number 1 to being an elite rim protector. Is you have to be willing to stick in there when some slashers are attacking at you downhill with the intention of putting you on a poster, and Hendricks has no fear of that. So their other selection here in the first round is pick number 20, and a player I have highlighted here in this video is Jett Howard for a few different reasons, and I think one of them is just flexibility. I think this gives the Rockets a ton of different options. I also did strongly consider a guy like Derek Lively. Now, this far down in the first round, you do have to kind of make some assumptions on who would maybe be available, who would maybe not be available. So, for example, Jett Howard could have gone maybe pick 17 to the Lakers. That's a real possibility. So you might have to be able to pivot here if you're Houston, which is why you need to line up your big board and have an idea of this is who we'd want, this is where we prefer him at this spot, so on and so forth. And if you really love a guy, you move up to go get him. But at pick 20, the Rockets here, I prefer Jett Howard for them out of Michigan because of that flexibility, the ability to play with the ball in his hands a little bit. I think he's going to be a semi-productive ball handler, especially in the pick and roll. A lot about a zoom action, which is what he found the most success at, in my opinion, in Michigan. His time playing for Juwan Howard. And I also think that he's a pretty solid connector. I think Michigan does a good job teaching touch passing and just being quick with decision making, especially when the ball is coming to you. If you have an open shot, let it fly. Otherwise, get it out of your hands to someone else who might have that open shot if you're not going to attack that closeout. I think Jett Howard's very proficient in that regard, which is why a fit here as a small forward for the Houston Rockets makes some sense, especially if they do get one of those guards earlier on, say an Thompson, or potentially, of course, Scoot Henderson, or you could even look if they get Victor Wembanyama, that this still makes some sense. If you sign a point guard, draft Jett Howard, and draft Victor Wembanyama, you're in a pretty strong spot moving forward. Otherwise, if they don't get a center, you could consider Derek Lively here. But again, I landed on Jett Howard because he's also a pretty solid three-point shooter. Shot above 40% from three on catch and shoot scenarios, not overall, but on catch and shoots. And because of that, you're projecting that someone else is going to have the ball in their hands quite a bit here for this Rockets team. And I think because of that, the Rockets need some connectivity, which is something that Ime Udoka found a lot of success with Derek White. Now, I don't think that Jett Howard here is going to be Derek White. He's not going to be that good defensively, but offensively, he's smart, quick decision maker. Most Michigan players have been in Juwan Howard's time as head coach there. So because of that, I feel pretty confident with his fit here with the Houston Rockets, which is why I opted for him in this mini mock at number 20. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you did enjoy this video. Had a lot of fun recording this on the Houston Rockets, covering not just one, but two of their first round draft picks this year and seeing what they could potentially do with it, how it could shake up and shape their lineups quite a bit. So had a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments down below, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.